The seatbelt sign has just clicked off at 35,000 feet above the American heartland when the sound cuts through the cabin like a gunshot. A sharp, deliberate crack. Then silence. Then a child's scream. United Airlines Flight 2247, a Boeing 737-800 operating the Chicago O'Hare to Los Angeles international route, carries 312 souls on this Tuesday afternoon. The aircraft is 40 minutes into its 4-hour journey, cruising at 35,000 feet with a tailwind that has the crew thinking they might land early. The galley carts are just being prepared. The passengers have settled into that familiar post-takeoff rhythm, the hum of the twin CFM56 engines forming the white noise backdrop to 100 private worlds. Headphones in, laptops open, eyes closed. Nobody is thinking about catastrophe. And then it happens. In row 14, seat C, a 7-year-old girl named Lily Chun is crying. Not the quiet kind of crying that dissolves into cabin noise. The kind that comes from shock, from pain, from the particular bewilderment of a child who does not understand why a stranger would want to hurt her. Her small hands reach across her lap, fingers grasping for something that is no longer there, something that should be there, something she depends on with the complete and trusting faith that only a blind child can have in the tools that help her navigate a world she cannot see. Her white cane lies in 2 pieces on the floor of the cabin, snapped clean in half. The woman responsible is still standing over her, one hand planted on the headrest of row 14, her designer carry-on bag swinging from the crook of her other elbow. She is breathing hard through her nose. Her face is flushed the particular shade of red that comes not from shame but from self-righteous fury, the color of someone who believes, with complete and unshakable conviction, that she is the victim in this moment. She is wearing a cream blazer that costs more than most people's car payments, and her expression carries the particular contempt of someone who has never once been told that the world does not revolve around her. Her name, as the gate agent at O'Hare would later confirm to federal investigators, is Sandra Whitmore. She is 53 years old, a real estate broker from Scottsdale, Arizona. She flies United Premier Gold and she wants everyone to know it. "It was in my way," she says, loudly enough for the 8 rows closest to her to hear. These people just let their junk spill everywhere and expect everyone else to accommodate them. The flight attendant in the forward galley, a 12-year veteran named Denise Okafor, is already moving. And in seat 14B, the aisle seat directly adjacent to where Sandra Whitmore is still standing, a man is very, very still. He has not yet moved. He has not yet spoken. His face is the particular controlled stillness of someone who is used to containing enormous force within the boundaries of professional calm. He is wearing a plain gray Henley, dark jeans, and New Balance sneakers. There is nothing about his appearance that would draw a second glance. He is average height, average build, with the kind of forgettable face that is, in certain professions, a carefully cultivated asset. His name is James Chun. He is 51 years old. He is the Chief Air Marshal of the United States Federal Air Marshal Service. But Sandra Whitmore doesn't know that yet. And that is the single most consequential piece of ignorance in the history of her spectacularly poor decision-making. Stay with this story, because what happens in the next 40 minutes of Flight 2247 is going to redefine what aviation justice looks like at 35,000 feet. James Chun has been flying since before Sandra Whitmore had a frequent flyer account. He logged his first commercial flight hours at 22, became a decorated air marshal at 26, and has spent the last 25 years operating in the invisible architecture of American aviation security, the layer of protection that exists in plain clothes, in regular seats, in the unremarkable middle rows of Boeing jets exactly like this one. He has subdued 3 attempted hijackings. He has identified and neutralized 2 in-flight threats before they became incidents. He has testified before the Senate Committee on Homeland Security 4 times. 3 months ago, he was confirmed by the Senate and sworn in as the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the Federal Air Marshal Service, the direct authority over every plainclothes marshal on every commercial flight in United States airspace. Today, he is not working. Officially, he is traveling with his daughter, Lily, for the first time since her mother, his wife, passed away from an aggressive brain tumor 14 months ago. The trip to Los Angeles is a promise he made to Sarah in her final weeks. A trip to see the Pacific Ocean, to let Lily feel the salt air and hear the waves, because Sarah always said that the ocean sounded like breathing, and she wanted Lily to have that. Lily lost her sight at age 4 to a rare degenerative condition. She has navigated the world with extraordinary courage and good humor ever since, aided by her white cane, her father's careful hand, and a spirit that her mother always said was made of something stronger than ordinary human stuff. The white cane was a birthday gift from Sarah 2 years ago. It had Lily's name inscribed on the handle in small letters. It was the last meaningful gift her mother ever gave her. It is now in 2 pieces on the floor of a United Airlines cabin, because Sandra Whitmore found it inconvenient. But let's go back, because to understand how this moment arrived, you have to understand the full architecture of Sandra Whitmore's sense of entitlement, a structure built over decades and fortified by a lifetime of getting exactly what she wanted, exactly when she wanted it, from every institution she ever interacted with. Sandra Whitmore was the kind of frequent flyer who collected complaints the way other people collect miles. Her United account had 17 formal complaints lodged against her in the past 4 years, ranging from demands that other passengers move their belongings from overhead bins she had decided were hers by right of arrival, to a notorious incident in 2022 at Denver International in which she screamed at a gate agent for 20 minutes because she had been assigned a middle seat on a full flight after missing her original boarding group. The Denver incident had earned her a formal warning from United's Customer Relations Department, a document she had framed, according to her former assistant, as a kind of trophy. She had a system. It revolved around the fundamental belief that her status, her spending, and her general importance to the airline ecosystem entitled her to a frictionless experience at all times, and that any friction she encountered was not the ordinary inconvenience of shared public space but a personal affront requiring immediate and disproportionate response. On the morning of Flight 2247, Sandra had arrived at O'Hare's Terminal 1 in a mood already calibrated for conflict. Her morning had gone wrong in the specific ways that morning go wrong for people who believe that competent systems exist to serve them personally. Her car service had been 4 minutes late. The Premier check-in line had 2 people ahead of her. The TSA pre-check lane had, in her words, basically everyone in it, which in practice meant 5 people. Each of these micro-frictions had been logged and mentally filed in the growing grievance account she would spend the flight drawing down. At the gate B18, she had already had a preliminary exchange with a gate agent named Marcus who had politely declined her request to be moved from 14A, a window seat, to 2A, a first-class window seat, on the grounds that 2A was occupied and that her gold status did not, in fact, entitle her to a complimentary upgrade on a sold-out flight. She had called Marcus unhelpful and, frankly, not very good at your job, and had swept toward the jetway with the particular energy of someone preparing a strongly worded email. She boarded to find that the overhead bin above row 2 was full. This was, in Sandra's assessment, a catastrophe. She was directed to the bin above row 14, where she found adequate space, which should have resolved the issue, except that row 14 also contained a 7-year-old girl with a white cane that extended slightly into the aisle, because Lily, being 7 and unused to the specific choreography of boarding a full 737, had not yet fully retracted it. James was in the process of helping her when Sandra arrived, carry-on in hand, expression preloaded. "That thing," Sandra said, looking at the cane, "needs to not be in the aisle." James looked up, measured the situation in the way that 25 years of threat assessment makes automatic, and said quietly, "We're getting settled. Just a moment." "I've had a morning," Sandra said, as if this were relevant information. "Haven't we all?" James replied, which was the wrong answer. He helped Lily settle into her seat, guided her hands to the armrests, showed her where the tray table latch was. All the small rituals of settling a child into an unfamiliar sensory environment. Lily was doing beautifully, her small face turned toward the oval window, asking her father if she could feel the plane move when it took off. Sandra loaded her bag into the overhead bin, which was fine, and then sat down in 14A, which was also her seat, and which should have been the end of it. It was not the end of it. For the first 40 minutes of the flight, Sandra Whitmore conducted a sustained low-grade campaign of hostility against the occupants of seats 14B and 14C. She made pointed remarks about the cane being in her space when Lily rested it against her knee. She called over the flight attendant, Denise, to complain that the child's seatback activity materials were spreading onto her armrest, which they were not. She sighed loudly and frequently in the performative way of someone who wants credit for their suffering. She made a comment, not entirely under her breath, about people who bring children on 4-hour flights and then just let them run wild. While Lily sat quietly listening to an audiobook on her father's phone, the single most well-behaved child in the cabin, James said nothing. He had learned, in the specific way that law enforcement officers learn, that de-escalation sometimes looks like silence, and that not every provocation requires a response. He was also genuinely trying to be present for his daughter, to be dad, not chief, to let the flight be what it was supposed to be, a bridge between grief and something like joy, a promise kept to a woman he still talked to in the dark hours of early morning. The seat belt sign clicked off. Denise and her colleague, a young flight attendant named Aaron, began preparing the galley carts. The cabin settled into cruise altitude. Sandra had been quiet for about 8 minutes, which James recognized, with the pattern recognition of long professional experience, as the silence before escalation rather than the silence of resolution. He was right. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. Lily shifted in her seat, reaching for her father's hand the way she often did in the particular suspended unreality of being airborne. Her cane, resting against her knee, slid perhaps 3 inches toward the aisle. 3 inches, the width of a paperback novel. Sandra Whitmore looked at it for a long moment with an expression of gathering fury, and then, with a deliberateness that would later be confirmed by 2 separate cabin cameras and the testimony of 11 passengers in adjacent rows, she reached down, picked up the cane, and snapped it across her knee. The crack of carbon fiber is a specific sound. The entire row heard it. The rows behind heard it. Denise, halfway through the forward galley curtain, heard it. And Lily heard it. What comes next happens at 2 speeds simultaneously, the speed of the cabin's stunned collective response, which is slow, the slow motion of shock of 20 nearby passengers processing what they have just witnessed, and the speed of James Chen's interior world, which does not operate in slow motion, which has never operated in slow motion, which has been trained across a quarter-century to move from assessment to decision with a velocity that most people will never experience. He makes a choice in approximately 1 second. He does not do what a father might do, which would be to respond with the raw and uncontained fury of a man watching a stranger deliberately destroy his dead wife's last gift to their blind daughter. He does not do that. He will not do that on this aircraft with these passengers at this altitude. He chooses the other thing, the harder thing, the thing that has defined his career and will, in the next 35 minutes, define something much larger. He turns to Lily first. "I've got you, sweetheart. The cane broke. We're going to get it fixed. Are you hurt?" Lily, shaking with the specific trembling of a child trying very hard not to cry, shakes her head. Then James Chun turns to Sandra Whitmore, and he says, in a voice so quiet that Sandra has to lean forward to hear it, "You just made the worst decision of your life. Please sit down." Sandra does not sit down. "Excuse me?" she says. "Excuse me? Your prop was in my space and I have rights as a paying customer of this airline, and if you think you're going to speak to me like that..." "Ma'am." Denise has arrived. She is looking at the 2 pieces of the cane on the floor of the cabin with an expression that has moved through disbelief into something harder. "Ma'am, I need to understand what happened here." "That thing was poking me," Sandra says. "I moved it." "You broke a child's mobility aid," Denise says. The professionalism is still there, but just barely. 12 years of flight attendant training are working very hard at this moment. A mobility aid is protected property under the Air Carrier Access Act. Breaking or interfering with a passenger's mobility equipment is a federal violation. "I know my rights," Sandra says, which is almost certainly the funniest thing anyone has said on a United flight all year, given the specific catalog of rights she is about to discover she does not have. "Aaron," Denise calls toward the galley, and her voice carries a specific register that Aaron, 6 months into his career, has never heard from Denise before. It is the register of someone calling for backup. "Can you come here, please?" What follows is a 30-minute symphony of escalation that the passengers of Flight 2247 will be telling their families about for the rest of their lives. Sandra Whitmore, having broken a blind child's white cane at 35,000 feet, now doubles down with the particular genius of someone who has mistaken every previous audience for an ally. She raises her voice. She invokes her gold status. She refers to Lily's cane, 3 times, as paraphernalia. She demands that James and Lily be moved to another row, specifically requesting that they be moved to the back of the aircraft, near the rear lavatory, because clearly they need more supervision. She speculates aloud that the cane was probably a prop anyway, and questions whether Lily is actually blind, doing the particular thing that sighted people with staggering ignorance sometimes do, squinting at a child who does not behave in the specific ways their imagination requires blind children to behave. At this point, the cabin has fully stopped pretending to watch movies. In rows 10 through 20, passengers have removed headphones. Phones have appeared. A woman in 16D, a retired schoolteacher named Patricia Vance, says, "Oh, this woman did not at a volume that requires no amplification." Denise handles it with extraordinary professionalism for approximately 12 minutes. She explains the Air Carrier Access Act. She explains that interference with a mobility aid is not a policy matter but a federal one. She offers Sandra water. She offers Sandra the opportunity to return to her seat and consider a path forward that does not involve additional federal violations. Sandra declines all of this in the loudest possible register. Then Sandra makes escalation number 1. She stands up. On an aircraft in flight, standing up during a confrontation with crew is a specific kind of statement. It crosses a line that experienced flight attendants are trained to recognize. Denise recognizes it. She makes a decision. "I need you to be seated, ma'am." "I will not be seated. I want to speak to the captain. The captain is flying the aircraft. Then I'll speak to whoever is in charge of this cabin, and I want that man." She points at James. "Removed from this vicinity because I feel unsafe." What happens in the next beat is one of the 2 moments that passengers in rows 10 through 20 will describe as the moment the whole plane changed. James Chun, who has been sitting quietly, holding his daughter's hand, reaches into the back pocket of his jeans and removes a slim black credential wallet. He does not open it yet. He simply places it on his knee. He looks at Denise. "Denise," he says, and Denise's eyes drop to the credential wallet, and then back up to James, and something shifts in her expression that Sandra Whitmore misses completely because she is still talking. "Perhaps it's time to let the captain know what's happening in the cabin." Denise nods. She turns, goes forward, and disappears behind the galley curtain. Sandra, interpreting this as victory, makes escalation number 2. She turns to the passengers in the nearby rows and begins to perform for them the full theatrical production of her grievance, complete with arm gestures, rhetorical questions, and an appeal to the collective to validate her position. "Am I wrong?" she asks the cabin. "Is it wrong to expect a certain standard when you're a paying customer?" The cabin's response is not what she was expecting. Patricia Vance, the retired schoolteacher, says, "You broke a blind little girl's cane." A man in 15A, a contractor from Detroit named Ray Burgess, says, "Lady, you need to sit down before this gets much worse for you." A woman with a toddler in 13B says nothing but stares at Sandra with an expression that communicates volumes. Sandra pivots, attempts a different approach, and makes escalation number 3. She looks at Aaron, the young flight attendant who has been hovering uncertainly at the galley curtain, and tells him that she is going to be reporting him personally for failing to control the situation, and that she will be contacting United's corporate office before this flight lands, and, "Trust me, I know people there." Aaron, to his considerable credit, says, "Ma'am, I think the situation is being handled. Please take your seat." Then the cockpit interphone rings. Not unusual, except that what Denise tells Captain Robert Hales, a 22-year United veteran currently hand-flying at flight level 350 over central Kansas, is unusual enough that Captain Hales makes a decision in about 45 seconds. He reaches up to the PA system. His voice fills the cabin with the particular authority of someone who is responsible for 312 lives and takes that responsibility as a literal and daily fact. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are aware of a situation in the main cabin, and I want to assure all passengers that it is being actively managed. I want to remind everyone on board that federal law prohibits interference with flight crew, and that any behavior classified as unruly under FAA regulations is subject to immediate legal action upon landing. We will be making an unscheduled stop if the situation requires it. I ask for everyone's patience and cooperation. Thank you. The cabin is very quiet. Sandra Whitmore is no longer performing. She is looking around at the faces near her and processing, possibly for the first time, that the audience she assumed was with her is not with her. She sits down. This is too late to be meaningful as a concession, but it does temporarily reduce the active surface area of the crisis. James Chun is still holding his daughter's hand. He has said nothing since his quiet instruction to Sandra to sit down. He is waiting. This is something he is extremely good at. The second act of Sandra Whitmore's unraveling begins 4 minutes later. Denise returns from the forward galley. With her is a man who has been sitting in 3C since departure, a man whom Sandra walked past during boarding without a second glance, a man in a plain blue polo shirt and khaki trousers who, if you were looking for the least remarkable-seeming person on the aircraft, might have been your first selection. Deputy Federal Air Marshal Gregory Torres. He has been aware of James Chen's presence on this flight since boarding. He has been monitoring the situation in rows 13 through 15 for the past 22 minutes. He has been in contact with his supervisor on the ground through the aircraft's air-to-ground communication system. He has been waiting for his senior officer to make a determination. The determination has been made. Gregory Torres reaches the aisle seat of row 14 and looks at Sandra Whitmore. He produces his credentials. He holds them at the precise eye level that ensures there is no possibility of misreading the gold seal of the United States Department of Homeland Security. "Ma'am," he says, "Federal Air Marshal, I'm going to need you to remain seated and place your hands on the tray table where I can see them." Sandra Whitmore does not move. She is looking at the credentials. She is beginning, slowly like a ship turning, to understand that something fundamental has changed in the geometry of this situation. "I haven't done anything," she says, "but the volume has dropped. The performance is over." "Ma'am," Torres says again. James Chen stands up. He reaches into the credential wallet on his knee and opens it. He holds it up, and the cabin of United Flight 2247 sees, on the identification card behind the gold shield, the words that transform a Tuesday afternoon flight into something that Sandra Whitmore will be explaining to attorneys for the next 3 years. James Chen, Chief Air Marshal, Federal Air Marshal Service, United States Department of Homeland Security. 11 passengers will later tell investigators and, subsequently, their considerable social media audiences, that Sandra Whitmore's face in this moment was the most extraordinary thing they had ever seen in a pressurized aluminum tube at altitude. The color left it first. Then the expression that replaced the color was something that didn't quite have a name, somewhere between the specific terror of someone who has just understood the full dimensions of their mistake and the blankness of a system that has crashed and has not yet managed to reboot. She says, "Oh," which is perhaps the most inadequate syllable ever deployed in the history of American aviation. James Chun does not raise his voice. He does not perform. He is still, visibly, a man who is also a father, and his first act after showing credentials is to turn back to Lily, to put his hand on her shoulder, to say, "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's okay." And then he turns back to the woman who broke his daughter's cane. "Sandra Whitmore," he says, with the particular calm of someone who has been managing crises in pressurized cabins for 25 years. "You are being detained pursuant to 49 U.S.C. 46504 and 46318. Interference with flight crew members and attendants and the destruction of a passenger's mobility aid in violation of the Air Carrier Access Act. You will remain seated until we land. You will not speak to other passengers. You will follow every instruction given by this crew. Do you understand?" Sandra Whitmore understands. The cabin of Flight 2247 erupts. Not in panic, not in chaos, but in the specific collective exhale and eruption of 300-plus people who have been holding tension in their bodies for the past 30 minutes and have now been told, by the physical reality unfolding in row 14, that justice is a real and present force, not an abstraction. Patricia Vance starts clapping. Ray Burgess joins her. Then most of rows 10 through 20. Then, in a wave that moves from front to back through the cabin like a very specific kind of turbulence, most of the aircraft. Denise, standing in the aisle with her hands folded in front of her and 12 years of professional composure barely intact, allows herself one small moment of something that looks very much like satisfaction. Captain Hales, informed via interphone of the development in the cabin, makes a second announcement. He notes that the situation is under control, that they will continue to Los Angeles as scheduled, and that he has notified LAX ground security and FBI aviation liaison of the situation on board. He thanks the passengers for their patience. He thanks the crew for their professionalism. He does not mention James Chun by name. He doesn't have to. Lily Chun, 7 years old, the daughter of a widowed chief air marshal and a woman whose memory was inscribed on a now-broken white cane, sits in seat 14C with her father's hand over hers and says, in a voice that carries the particular clear register of a child who has grown up listening with extraordinary attention to a world she cannot see, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" "Yeah," James says. "We're going to be okay." For the remaining 2 hours and 7 minutes of Flight 2247's journey to Los Angeles, Sandra Whitmore sits in 14A with Gregory Torres in the aisle to her immediate left and does not speak a single word. The galley cart comes through. Aaron, the young flight attendant, delivers drinks to every row. When he reaches row 14, he sets down a ginger ale for Lily and a coffee for James and looks at Sandra and says, with the precise professional courtesy of someone who has made peace with the moment, "Ma'am, can I get you anything?" Sandra shakes her head. United Airlines ground coordinator Rachel Mejia is waiting on the jetway at LAX with 3 things. A formal written apology from the airline on corporate letterhead, a voucher for a first-class return flight and accommodation that she has been authorized to offer by the regional vice president for customer experience, who learned about the situation somewhere over New Mexico and spent the remainder of the flight making phone calls, and a replacement white cane sourced from the LAX Accessibility Services office, along with the card of the airline's director of accessibility services, who wants to personally arrange a replacement for the damaged one. The 2 FBI aviation liaison agents and 2 LAPD officers waiting at the gate are there for Sandra. She is escorted off the aircraft first, before the general deplaning, per standard procedure in federal air incidents. She walks the jetway between 2 agents with her designer carry-on bag and the specific posture of someone who has had the architecture of their life altered in a way that cannot be undone. There are, owing to a passenger who was not quite as discreet as he thought with his phone in 16F, cameras waiting in the terminal. Not press cameras. Just people with phones who had received texts from people on the flight. In 2026, this is the same thing. The footage of Sandra Whitmore's deplaning from Flight 2247 will be viewed, in its first 24 hours, by approximately 14 million people. She faces a federal charge of interference with the flight crew, a charge under the Air Carrier Access Act for destruction of a mobility aid, and a separate charge of harassment of a minor. United Airlines has filed its own incident report with the FAA, triggering an automatic review process. The Transportation Security Administration, operating under James Chen's direct authority as Chief Air Marshal, has initiated a no-fly order pending the resolution of the federal charges. Her United Premier Gold account has been permanently closed. Her attorney, reached by her from the FBI's Los Angeles field office, will later describe the call as one of the more difficult client conversations of my career. The broken cane becomes, in the days that follow, a specific kind of symbol. A Texas-based mobility aid company, having seen the story, contacts James Chun and arranges for a custom replacement for Lily, made from aircraft-grade carbon fiber, with her name inscribed on the handle in the same place and the same font as the original. The company's founder, who has a blind daughter of her own, says in her statement that she just wanted Lily to have something beautiful. The replacement cane arrives in Los Angeles 2 days after the flight, delivered to the hotel where James and Lily are staying. The hotel whose management has quietly upgraded them to a suite and left a handwritten note from the general manager at the front desk. Lily and James make it to the Pacific Ocean on their second day in Los Angeles. They sit on the sand at Santa Monica, just the 2 of them, early in the morning before the beach gets crowded, and Lily takes off her shoes and lets the cold water run over her feet and says it sounds like breathing, exactly like her mother said it would. The Federal Air Marshal Service releases a formal statement 3 days after the incident, confirming the identities and titles of the personnel involved and noting that the agency is reviewing cabin security protocols in response to the incident. The FAA issues a public reminder about the provisions of the Air Carrier Access Act and the criminal liability attached to interference with mobility aids. United Airlines announces the creation of a new mandatory training module for all customer-facing staff on accessibility accommodation, to be developed in consultation with the National Federation of the Blind. Sandra Whitmore pleads guilty to the federal interference charge 8 weeks later, accepting a plea agreement that includes a 2-year period of supervised release, 40 hours of community service at a disability services organization, a permanent no-fly listing with all domestic carriers under the FAA's PGFM protocol, and a civil settlement with James Chun that covers the cost of Lily's original cane, and a sum that the agreement stipulates is not to be disclosed but which James donates, in its entirety, to a foundation that provides mobility aids to blind children from low-income families. Her attorney makes a statement noting that his client accepts responsibility and regrets her actions. Sandra Whitmore makes no statement. The world that exists at 35,000 feet operates by its own specific physics. It is a world where strangers share a pressurized cylinder smaller than most people's apartments for hours at a time, where the social compact is compressed and concentrated by altitude and proximity and the shared recognition of mutual vulnerability. Most people in that world do the thing that humans mostly do in close shared space. They extend small courtesies, they accommodate each other's needs, they remember that the people around them are people. Every so often, someone decides that they are the exception, that their comfort supersedes the dignity of those around them, that the ordinary rules of human decency have an asterisk next to them that reads "except for people like me." These people are, in the end, always wrong. Sometimes they discover this in a way that is merely embarrassing. And sometimes, on a Tuesday afternoon somewhere over Kansas, they discover it at 35,000 feet, in the presence of someone who has spent 25 years ensuring that the sky remains a place where the rules apply equally to everyone who enters it, and where a 7-year-old girl flying to see the Pacific Ocean can sit safely in her seat with her cane and listen to the engines and not be afraid. If this story reminded you that the world still has room for consequence and justice, share it. Let it find the people who need to see it. And if you have ever been the person extending a small kindness in a difficult shared space, you are the reason flights like 2247 mostly go the way they're supposed to. The next story is waiting